This is just something important. Well, I don't know how important it is, but it's something I need to check off my to-do list. Um, that is, do some gameplay footage of the original Windows, not necessarily, it isn't necessarily original, but the Windows XP executable for Minesweeper. I wouldn't say original because this is not the Windows 3.1 executable for Minesweeper, it's the Windows XP one, but it looks extremely similar to the Windows 3.1 executable. So this is not the Minesweeper that's on the Microsoft Web Store that has adverts in it. So trying to redeem myself from that catastrophe where I didn't like check it before I started recording. So I didn't realize what I was going to record would have advertisements in it beforehand. So I have this to do. I have quite a bit to do actually as season one concludes. Um, so firstly, okay, I hit a bomb immediately there. The channel banner. So for some reason I'm very slow at painting that. You wouldn't think it would take very long, but I only do like a little bit a day. And it's hard for me to build up the motivation to start my painting session in a given day. Once I get going, I can kind of keep going, but it takes a little bit to kind of start getting going with the painting. So that's actually still not done. What's done is the amount of the paintings in the field of view you can see on desktop or on mobile. But if you were to see the entire thing using YouTube TV, which I believe is what you can use to do that, you'll notice that the painting is not done. Um, Actually, technically, it's not done um, as far as what you can see on desktop and mobile either. There was originally intended to be some lightning coming out of the orb, but you wouldn't have known that I intended to do that. So, as far as you could tell looking at it, it looks done. Anyway, so there's that. I have this Minesweeper Let's Play. I'm also going to do another episode of the World's Hardest Game 3, where I rant about video game preservation and what I thought about how well what I call Season 1 went. So Season 1 is those first 7 episodes of Bionicle Games Review, Your Turn to Die, and Never 7, as well as Control, although I haven't finished playing Control yet. But those series is encompassing what I'm codenaming Season 1. So I have to do that. It looks like I'm at a dead end here on this. Because there could be one here or one there. But one being there is perfectly fine. So um, there's two. I guess there has to be. Well, no, it could be split wide here as well, right? So that's still it's not deterministic. Um, I hate that combination. Oh man, I'm gonna have to minimize OBS because having this in two places is really bothering my head. Okay. Oh, what a bomb out! I had to click around trying to hit a touche. Did not succeed. There's a touche. Um, Bomb out. That was an unintentional micro pun. Um, Continuing on. So I had to make that World's Hardest Game 3 video. Then I have to make a short video, I don't have to, but I definitely want to, about recording Monog on Linux so that I can validate my claim that if you play Monog on Linux using an NVIDIA driver, you get some artifacting around the cursor. So I'll do a little bit of that and try to say something kind of funny about why people play video games on Linux. So I'll go about that. Um, and then let's see here. Oh yeah, I have to do control on Linux. So that's going to be a little bit time consuming because I have to download it. I have to download and install Steam on that on the Linux side. So I'll have to take care of that and then see if I can get that to work. Um, and then I gotta check the original files for Never 7 again, the disk images, and see if I can get the background music to play while the fan patch is applied. I think I can do that by simply mounting the fourth disk and see if that works, and see if I can restore the functionality of that executable again. Because as I was recording that Let's Play, it suddenly broke. And files breaking is something extremely unnerving to me because it makes me get me on, because these games and these disk images, they're somewhat rare, and the ability to get them could disappear at any moment. And so me preserving these files and having them accessible to me all the time is very important. And so it's important that the copies I have are working. I have multiple copies different places, so one works, I could copy in the new one from that I have backed up, and so on. So I got to see if I can get those original files for Never 7 to work again. And make sure I have a copy backup of Ever 17 and everything, make sure that's all backed up. Then I've got to finish recording The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, which is going to... I just have to finish recording that because that's something for Season 2. And then for Season 3, I'm going to need to figure out a way to get a hold of whether it's a disk or it's files for Remember 11. So I need to work on getting a hold of that. That's important. This is basically just I'm making a reference to to-do list for myself in video form while kind of vaguely playing Minesweeper in the background here. So that's really what's on my mind right now. This is clear here. Got one! So there's these three here. It's not really doing much for me. Two out of three. I guess we can say these three are clear. There we go. Made some progress there. And because one of these has to be, these three have to be clear too. That didn't really get me very far. Wow. What stuck out to me? I just gonna make some comments on this. What stuck out to me when listening back? I was listening back to the last episode of Never 7, and an impression I often got from listening to myself talking. We as humans always dislike hearing our voice back recorded. It always sounds different to us on recording at first than it does in our heads when we're talking, at least at first. I've gotten to the point where I've heard myself on recording so much that I now hear in my head when I'm talking what I hear when I'm recording. I understand where that comes from now. But another element of that is I got the impression that I was trying to talk faster than I could. I was trying to talk extremely fast. And so fast, in fact, that my head could not keep up with what I was trying to say. It's almost as if I had all this information in my head I wanted to communicate, but I was trying not to be restricted to the linearity of speech and how you have to present that information in a one-dimensional format. I was trying to blast it all out of my head, out of my mouth at once. And just blurring all of the words together with weird messed up consonants, weird messed up vowels, and it got close to incomprehensible at times. It was actually even worse in the DDLC Plus recap. Now, why is this important? Well, this is kind of important. One is, I just published really somewhat bad content because I was unintelligible in it. Contained a lot of unintelligible speech. That's not good. But also because I have a really long recap I'm doing about Ever 17 coming up, which I'm still writing the script for, or the notes for. I'm not going to stick to the script exactly. And if I talk super fast during that, such that that entire big long thing becomes incomprehensible, I'm going to be very disappointed in myself. So I have to be really careful when I sit down to record that long speech I have about what I thought about Ever 17, that I take it nice and slow. Um, and try to catch myself and make sure that I'm not talking faster than I can talk. And in so doing, just sort of blow it. If I blow it, I could always try recording it again. However, it's never what your ideas are and what you want to say is never as good the second time. You can tell it's something you've already said and you're just kind of going through a second time. Well, sometimes that's not the case. It depends. Sometimes it's better the second time, sometimes it's not. But also, it's a long thing. I don't want to re-record all that. I only have so much time in my life to do these things. I just don't want to mess with it. So I want to get it right the first time. Another thing I have to worry about a lot when it comes to those really long talking things is that my soft palate gets dry extremely easily. And if I don't, if I try to talk too fast, and it can be kind of a vicious cycle because if my soft palate starts to get kind of dry, I'll start to think I need to try to get my talking done more quickly to try to get it done before it gets even more dry. Well, I talk faster, that makes it so I push more air, which makes my soft palate get even drier. And so I end up talking even faster, and even faster, and even faster, and it just kind of spirals downhill. So to try to alleviate that, I guess, well, the impression I get of what singers use to try to help prevent their soft palate from getting extremely dry. Oh, I accidentally clicked the wrong square. Got lucky it was not a bomb. Is tea with honey and lemon in it. Whoops, I messed up. But some people, I've read somewhere some singer claimed it doesn't work. They claimed honey works, but the tea doesn't work, or at least doesn't work any better than just plain old water would have worked. But the honey and lemon juice doesn't work, but honey does work. But so there is some disagreement about what's best to drink while recording or singing to prevent your soft palate from getting dry or getting so dry you can't do what you're trying to do. But I think there is also agreement on what doesn't work, and that is cold water. So definitely don't want to have ice water. That's apparently not very helpful. As you can imagine, I have this issue too with singing. I don't sing very seriously, but when I do sing, especially when I'm trying to hit like higher notes, stuff in the head voice, oftentimes my soft palate will get really dry, sort of suddenly without warning. And then it gets hard for me to continue singing. I get sort of cut off by that. Or I'll feel my throat kind of constricting, and then I stop singing nearly as well. This constriction is involuntary. So yeah, it's something I have to personally be aware of, either long recording sessions or singing, is that soft palate dryness. Okay, something really got messed up here because, that's just clear, isn't it? Okay, phew. Is that soft palate dryness, which could really get me in that Ever 17 long video. So I really have to watch out for both the soft palate dryness and just trying to talk too fast. And this is not necessarily because I think I have a limited amount of time, and I tell you to talk explosively fast to get the video done in a certain time interval. It's just I naturally just end up talking faster. It's like a glitch in my brain. I just go too fast. It's like you're trying to play an audition or an excerpt for an audition on your musical instrument, say a saxophone. And as you keep playing your excerpt for your audition, you keep playing it faster and faster and faster because you're nervous. It's kind of like that. It just involuntarily just gets faster until all my words get all blur and smashed together and you cannot tell what I'm saying. Okay. So for all those videos where I talked really fast and you couldn't tell what I was saying at all, I'm sorry. We all have to start somewhere, and that is some of the growing pains I have to go through. Is that one of my personal challenges is the whole talking too fast thing. That's something I have to worry about. And I'll try to do better in the future about that. But as for the Never 7 recap, it just is what it is. I just talked fast in some of those parts. And it is, and that's just going to have to be what the video is. So that's, um, yeah, I guess that just is what it is. It's now that I've kind of gone through the whole talking fast thing when it relates to Never 7 recap, it seems that I've already started getting onto the whole um, season 1 review already. And so I'm really tempted just on the spot here, with the risk of later being redundant when I play The World's Hardest Game 3, to actually continue on with the whole season 1 review. So there are 3 games I played in season 1, not counting the Bionicle games. And these games were Never 7, Your Turn to Die, Death Game by Majority, which is something like, in Japanese, it's not quite a literal translation from the original Japanese. The original Japanese was kind of like, implied you die, and then something that was like majority, something that's roughly translates to death by majority rule or something. It was like, die, death game by majority. Um, Might be a more literal translation. Um, and with doing so, this is kind of what I want to branch out into. So just kind of branch out into some silliness. I originally made this YouTube channel where I just wanted to do something I had been wanting to do for a pretty long time. Started to talk fast again. Oops. Which was record a bunch of Let's Plays of Bionicle games. Particularly the ones I wanted to do, the ones that I was the most excited about doing was Monolog 2 and Vnog. And these 2 games are extremely miserable to record a Let's Play of, and they're the ones that I the least want to record a Let's Play of again. Like when I do Bionicle Games review, I might just skip them. But in the past, those were the ones that I wanted to do the most. Those were the most excited about doing. Those were the 2 games that I was the most excited about doing, and that is until I actually did them. They're like a task you really want to only do once in your life, though. So I was excited about doing the task, but now it's like it's done. I don't want to touch it again. The reason why I talk about doing it again is you may have noticed that I'm doing games that I've previously done again, just because some of my videos in the past I considered very poor quality for various reasons. I've already went through this in previous recordings, but doing it here just in case you missed it. Those being low bitrate recordings, or recordings where the audio wasn't balanced very well. Because I didn't know what I was doing very much when I first started recording video games. I would do things like just use whatever default settings OBS automatically applied, which could have been a bitrate of 2500 kilohertz, which on some games looks terrible if you record 1080p footage at that low of a bitrate. I also did things like record samples of me and my voice in the background music and adjust the settings into the sliders in OBS beforehand to try to get a good balance of the game background music volume and my voice volume. And then I would kind of go with that. I would hit play and just record with those settings. And they would record both on the same track. And I just hope I got it right at the start. And I might have actually got it right at the start as far as how loud I would talk at the beginning of the Let's Play. But as Let's Play went on, I would talk softer and softer and softer. And as I started to talk softer, my voice started to get more and more drowned out by the background music as you went further and further. And there were some games like The Legend of Matanui where the background music level wasn't consistent between level to level. The background music in Pohatu's level was really loud, and I wouldn't account for that. And so when I played Pohatu's level, my voice got drowned out way more so than in the other levels. So I've learned now that you should always record that you should record for 1080p. You take YouTube's recommendation, which you can just Google for high definition, which is 15 kilobits, 15,000 kilobits per second or 15 megabits per second for that bit rate. Now some games, because they're visual novels or whatever, they don't require such a high bit rate, just because we're not really recording something super action intensive. But for something like, but some of those something like Control, for example, you definitely want to. I messed up. You want to make sure that bit rate is up to that standard. So those two reasons, a lot of my old videos are not good, and so that's why I wanted to re-record a lot of those Bionicle games, especially because I considered a lot of the Bionicle videos I made unwatchable just because there were games that were too difficult to do this episodic blind Let's Play of, like Bionicle the Game GBA. Now, surprisingly, I have a somewhat loyal, he's a subscriber to me, person who watches a lot of my videos, surprisingly, despite how unwatchable I think they are. And I actually know what his screen name is. I'm going to call him out here. If I can. I'm not really playing Minesweeper at the moment because I'm clicking around my YouTube page. Steve Steveson. So yeah, well, I don't know if it's a he or a she. I mean, his screen name suggests a he, but it's obviously a fake name, so it could be a she. Actually watches a lot of these kind of videos that I thought were unwatchable originally. But I wanted to make them more compact so they were a little bit more watchable, at least. So that's why I was doing them all again. Anyway. So I got off on a whole tangent about why I was redoing things in low quality. But where I got off onto that tangent from was that I originally created the YouTube channel specifically to record Bionicle games. But once I started recording games and getting into that whole thing, I decided, I can record things more than just Bionicle games here. There's some other games I'd like to record. And so I decided to branch the stuff out. And this is doomed to anger people who subscribe to me specifically to watch Bionicle games. So I appear to haven't gotten any unsubs due to that. I have had some unsubscribes, but those people seem kind of random. So I don't know they don't seem to be the people who subscribe to my channel because of the Bionicle Let's Plays that have unsubscribed. But this was what I wanted to do, and so I decided to try doing it. And so there was some risk of posting Your Turn to Die and Never 7 videos from people who used to watch those Bionicle videos going like, why are you cluttering my feed with this stuff? I haven't gotten any bad comments, so I've succeeded in avoiding that by chance. I've actually gotten one, quote-unquote hate comment so far, which is a pretty low rate of hate comments, so I'm doing pretty good as far as negative comments are concerned. Accidentally clicked the wrong square, but I got lucky because it turned out to not be a bomb. Okay. I would have known it wasn't a bomb too if I would have paid attention. I just intended to click on a different square. Anyway, so how well did that go? Well, as I've said before, Your Turn to Die got about as many views per episode as my Bionicle videos did when they were new. So it did seem to be for someone who has no YouTube prowess whatsoever. Just getting 5 or 6 to 11 views on a video is actually pretty good, especially if that video is several increments down on a series, because you could get a lot of clicks on like the first one, but then because all the remaining ones, the title says it's a part, 13, then people wouldn't click on that because they would obviously start with part 1. And the people who managed to get to part 3 would have watched part 13 would have watched 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 12. So that one obviously didn't go well, like holistically. It went well for someone who has just started like me. Never 7, on the other hand, there was about 11 views on the first episode, but then they dropped off to 0 after that. Goose egg for even starting the second episode on. Like no one was interested in watching me play that game. And I think I kind of know why these kind of things happened. This doesn't explain why there was 11 views on the first episode, but Your Turn to Die is kind of a popular thing to watch Let's Plays of. Take, for example, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, right? I could watch several people play that exact same game over and over again because I'm interested in learning about how different people react to the material being presented to them in that game. It's a game that's really fun to watch reactions to, essentially. And so even though you already know what happens, or I've already watched a whole bunch of Let's Plays already of that, if you were to post a Let's Play, I didn't even know who you were, of that game, I would have a tendency to click on it because I want to see how you react to certain things in that game. And of course, there's a tendency to skip to certain parts of your Let's Play because I don't really have the time to watch all of it beginning to end. So I skip to like certain places. But that's a game where even if you're a nobody, as long as I take myself as an anecdote, if you post, it's a big view grab. It's just like, it's kind of a shill game because of this reality. Even if no one knows who you are, if you post a Let's Play of that game, you have a sort of high probability of getting some clicks on that Let's Play. So Your Turn to Die has some of that element to it. So it is a game where you can kind of get a lot of clicks onto it, potentially, even if people don't know you or maybe don't even like you. Never 7, on the other hand, is a game that people don't really know about as much, and so it doesn't really have that effect. So you get less of that traffic from people who don't even know who you are. That being said, that doesn't explain why there's so much on the first one. I think it may be because some of the Bionicle subscribers actually clicked on the first one because they were curious. And why it died off. But another reason, but part of the reason why Your Turn to Die probably did better as opposed to Never 7 is simply because of that quality of Your Turn to Die, where it's sort of sophisticated why it has that quality. But that quality where people want to see how you react to what that game presents. It's apparently fun to see reactions to. Now, I didn't react very much to it myself. I kind of went through it half asleep. But whatever. I can self-deprecate myself into oblivion, but I don't know what good that would do me. Another reason is just because Never 7 doesn't have a good hook. So the very first bit of that game isn't very effective into convincing people that the rest of it's going to be good. It works kind of well as a commercial thing as you buying the game to play it, because if you paid money to buy that disc, you wouldn't... Well, that disc was only released in Japanese. You have to use a fan translation to make it into English. You would keep giving it a chance because you paid for it. And so you would keep playing that game until it got good. If you could argue that game ever gets good. But if you're watching a Let's Play, you don't really have that. So because the hook of that game isn't very good, it looks just kind of like this lame slice of life thing at the start. People will not, just from the game itself, regardless of my personality, it just doesn't hook people in. that Let's Play just isn't very captivating. And so, because of the lack of hook, all that viewership just dropped off. Now, I'm going to spoil some things for you. That game kind of acts like a slice of life, almost the whole thing. So you wouldn't be wrong. Ever 7 isn't really known to be particularly exciting. Never 7 was what I meant. The reason why you play Never 7 is because the author of that game is actually really famous. The scenario One of the scenario writers is someone who wrote some very famous and very good games later in his career. And that game is the first game in a series of games which contains a couple of those really good games. So that's why you play it. You don't play it particularly because that game in itself is good. You play it because you're just a big fan of the author who wrote it. And because later games in the series are good. So you have to kind of just get through the first one to go to the later ones. So that's kind of what that game's all about. It isn't necessarily a very good game in itself. Now, I kind of liked it. So, I mean, I had fun. It's not like it was trash. I liked it. I had some fun with it. But just kind of to defend the people who didn't watch that Let's Play, besides they just didn't have time because they have lives, real life people, um, uh, it's not a super exciting Let's Play to watch. So, I don't necessarily say you have to go. I'm not going to demand people go watch that. Like, it's not like you missed out on a whole lot. It is a little bit. I did say this on the previous World's Hardest Game 3 episode when I was doing like the mid-season recap. That it is a little bit worrying because the next game in the series, which I have mentioned already several times, is called Ever 17. And that game is a little bit obscure, but it's also really good. And I want people to watch that such that Let's Play becomes popular enough, that game becomes popular enough that people hear about it. And that might garner some interest into the topic of video game preservation and so on. An issue with Ever 17 is I feel like the hook of that game isn't very good either. In other words, it doesn't start out in a way that would make it seem super interesting either. And it does have sort of although a different circumstance than Ever, a little bit more of an intense circumstance than Ever 7, does have a bit of a slice of life-ish feel in some parts of it. So I'm worried about the hook on that one because it is something I want a lot of people to watch, but I'm worried about people actually watching it because that poor Never 7 performance may be a predictor of poor Ever 17 performance. That's what I'm worried about. Cool. As for my actually doing those Let's Plays well, so I've already mentioned talking fast is a problem that I have. I also can have issues with sometimes bringing up topics that are not appropriate. If you watch my big long Legend of Oh no that too saves me, that too right there. Okay. Phew, thought I was in a 50-50 situation there. If you watch my big long, the Legend of Matsunui rebuild playthrough, I sometimes will do that. So, I'm still not going to say what I brought up then here, but I brought up something that would, if you bring that thing up on the internet, you will get downvoted into an oblivion. It's something you definitely do not want to bring up on the internet on something where it doesn't call for that. Um, it was not abortion. It was not anything LGBTQ plus. It was something else, but I still shouldn't have been something that should have been brought. It's still something that it should not have been brought up. Um, if anyone's just to check some things off your list, though, for you, those of you who are curious. No, it's not those things. Um, So yeah, like I think it was Never Seven where I went off on this thing about um, Bay's rule with God or something, and kind of looking back on that after the fact, I find it kind of cringe. It seemed like a good idea by the time, but it came off as kind of cringe. Another thing that can happen to me is a lot of these Japanese origin games they have they have this philosophy of that comes up of man is basically good. And this is called we call this humanism. Um, the idea that given like just in its ordinary like isolated like sort of pseudo isolated state. The reason I don't say completely isolated is if you isolate a person from a bunch of other people, they go insane. So, in the absence of whatever corrupting forces exist, whatever those are, man behaves in a way that we would, according to our current societal standards, would assume we call good. Um, and so this gives this perception that you can theoretically build a society that over time you can make the conditions of human life better and better and better. Um, and man has the capability of improving the overall general behavior of humanity over time and allows for things like true communism to be possible. But I'm a fundamentalist Christian, which I've never said before, but you could probably tell if you watch a lot of my videos. And so I profess that the heart of man is desperately wicked and beyond cure in a way that could not even be understood. So it does evil to the point you can't even rationalize. And the pre-flood world, man went to a state where all man did and thought was evil continually. And so left to its own devices, isolated, men do evil. So in other words, I do not believe that man is basically good. And so every time something comes up in a game where someone says man is basically good, you get this like reaction, some sort of weird like negative reaction out of me, which you could argue whether this is good or bad based on certain like philosophical things, but it's not what people really want to see. It doesn't really do any good, really, and it's not what people want to see and hear when they watch a Let's Play. They don't want to hear that kind of thing come out. So it's kind of annoying, and I want to try to curtail that a bit. It's not like I want to curtail it's not like it's like never talk about God, don't say God rules, because that's not good. Um, Obviously. I wouldn't think that is good. But don't bring up God in ways that are like won't actually those turn people off. Right? Don't do that. Um, Even if I'm right, don't like just turn people off because this doesn't really do any good. So that's something I can get into like I could get down into things like that and get into these soapboxes and things. I've managed to avoid the politics um, pretty well, but I haven't been able to avoid that pretty well. The whole man is basically good thing very well. So that's something that kind of went ah hit a bomb. I accidentally clicked the wrong square too. I meant to click the square below it, and I clicked that by accident. So that's something I want to do better. And lastly, this is something that came up with Ever 17, which I haven't posted yet, more so than stuff like Your Turn to Die and Ever 7. When I do Let's Plays, or when I watch Let's Plays, the reason what I really want to see, and I already mentioned this with Danganronpa, is how the person playing the game reacts to what they're given, and what their predictions are as to what will happen in the story later. In other words, what do they think the answers to the mysteries are? I want them to want to understand how they're ingesting the material and how and what they're thinking. I want to know what you're thinking. And there are some problems where in my creating my big long Ever 17 script, where I'm realizing that there are a lot of places where I might have been thinking something but didn't say it for some unknown reason. And this makes it such that Let's Play doesn't look like in its entirety how I would want a Let's Play to look. Um, in other words, I don't share my thoughts, but I want other people to in their Let's Plays. And when they do that thing where, I thought of a theory, but I'm not going to say what it is because I hate that, right? I hate that so much. So I don't want to do it myself if I hate it when other people do that. But I have found myself doing that a bit in the Ever 17 playthrough. So I also want to make sure that I fix that and don't do a whole lot of that later. Just kind of like gonna try to mature and progress a little bit and get a little bit better at this over time. So I think that's all I have to say about season 1. Now, since I'm recording this, and I had in order to have something to say, I moved forward when I was going to do the Season 1 recap from the World's Hardest Game 3 to the Minesweeper video. And that's just how it's going to go. Okay. What next? I'll have to worry about image compositing. That's another thing to put on my to-do list. When I do the World's Hardest Game 3, I gotta figure out a way to get Coco into the middle of the screen. Because previous thumbnail, I can only figure out how to get her masked on the left side of the screen. I could put her anywhere on the screen I wanted to, but if I wanted to just mask out the black background, such that you could see, such you only got the sprite and not like the background of the image the sprite was in, I can only do that on the left side. So I need to figure out how to fix that. So many things to do. Video game preservation is what I was going to talk about next. And because I haven't beaten this Minesweeper yet, and still need things to talk about, I have to go into that next, I suppose. So, man, I'm drawing up like I said I would. Just got to push through this. Man, I'm stumped on this too. This square of death here. Really annoying. So a lot of these things is only one more needed. It's not really resulting in anything useful. Come on. Give me a touche. There we go. If you didn't watch my previous Minesweeper video, a touche means a space with no bombs touching it. How did I come up with that name for that? I don't know. I was a little kid at the time. Single-digit age. So what's this all about? Well, let me try to explain. It's going to be a kind of a long-winded explanation, and I got to worry about not talking too fast while I give this explanation. So let's talk about books going out of print. So Joe Schmo writes a book, and he sells his book to the publishing house. So he sells the rights to it to the publisher, essentially, for a fixed amount, or for royalties, one or the other. And this gives the publisher the intellectual property of that story, or that work of nonfiction that Joe Schmo wrote. Then, now the intellectual property is owned by the publishing house, and the publishing house will use that to print copies of that book and sell them to libraries and bookstores and bookstores, which will then distribute them out to the populace for money, which will make paying the royalties to Joe Schmo worth it, or buying the intellectual property from Joe Schmo worth it. They will continue to do this until it's no longer profitable. Like the machinery required to continue to print that book is no longer paid for by its sales. Everybody who's interested in reading it has already read it. And there's this initial burst there. Sometimes books and the next generation would get distracted by the new books of that generation because books always keep coming out, right? And don't necessarily have time. Each generation doesn't have time to read all of the books, all of the literature out there. So they have to choose, and so they choose just the best of the old literature and the new literature. So some of the books you may have read and enjoyed earlier in your life, if those books do not get popular enough, even though you like them, future generations may not be able to consume them themselves because they go out of print. Now, books do have some material lifespan, so you will be able to find some used books. So just because a book goes out of print doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to read it. You just may have to get a used copy. However, everything goes the way of the world and paper decays away. And so eventually, all books will eventually become unreadable. As they'll go out of print, the information required to print them is lost, the story is lost, and all of the copies of them have decayed away. Now, just because what technology does is one of the things that technological advancements allow us to do is make things of lower quality. You might go, what? That's an advancement? Yes, it is, because making things of lower quality, but in a way it's less expensive, makes them more accessible. So, in the old days, back in the days of when the Byzantine Empire, books were extremely expensive, and they were handwritten by scribes on tanned sheep hide. There's a name for it. It's called vellum. So very famous copies of the Bible, like the Codex Volcanus and Codex Alexandricus and so on, were written on sheepskin. And those copies of the Bible, those manuscripts, still exist today. And partly had to do with monastery members continuously updating them and writing over them to make sure that they were still readable. They did require some maintenance. But because these were not written on paper, these ancient Bibles are in a lot better shape than the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution, which were written on paper but are much younger. So, you can literally leaf through these ancient Bibles by hand. You do not want to ever even dare touch the Constitution or take it out of its climate-controlled, humidity-controlled, confining situation. You cannot do like they did in the National Treasure movie with Nicolas Cage, where you just simply roll up the Declaration of Independence. That's not realistic. It'll just go to pieces if you were to do that. It's in very, very bad condition. And because it sort of relates to sometimes Europeans like to point out, hey, why are homes in the United States? But the advantage of paper, this is what I was trying to get to. We'll go back to that half sentence I just said later, is that these Bibles were extremely expensive to make. They required about a year's wages of a man's year's wages at the time. And not everybody would have their own copy because it's just horrible. It's like having your own house all over again. With paper books, we've figured out a way to make stuff accessible to everybody. So our ability to make low quality stuff has made it so that we can make it more accessible. The disadvantage, of course, is that it decays away. But because older stuff tended to be higher quality, old writing tended to be done in ways like inscribing it on stone, which made it extremely enduring. The older texts are, the more likely, the more longer they will be preserved. And so there's stuff, the most important stuff for the deep past, like ancient Greek literature, the Bible, and so on, is pretty well preserved. Um, anyway, I was getting at there was like Europeans sometimes are like, why are the homes in the United States built so shabbily? We have a name for them too in the United States. We call them plywood palaces. And the reason is, although this sometimes doesn't realize come out in practice, the philosophy behind it is it makes it so it's easier to get a home. It's better to have a bad home than no home, right? So, home ownership is an important thing in the United States culture, and unfortunately, it's fading away right now. We're going into this kind of rental culture, which I despise, but at least used to be, and there is some of this sentiment still lingering around. Important of the culture of the United States, the idea that you own a home. That in order to maintain that home ownership thing going, homes need to be affordable, and therefore homes need to be a certain amount of crap, essentially. And I don't disapprove. Like, if homes have to be kind of bad, and for everybody to be able to own one, then they're just going to have to be bad. So we always have the capability of building a nicer home if we have the money, but we don't. But if you had a lot of money, you theoretically could in the United States still build a really like robust home if you wanted to. Anyway, this is kind of related to the whole idea of like why paper is good. It's less quality, but it helps people get their stuff. Anyway, so what causes stories to die out is them going out of print, and then the used copies decay away, and the thing was not popular enough to become a classic and make it into academia and become some of the required reading as determined by academia. And so sometimes if and eventually so some of the literature from each generation ends up lost. And we generally are okay with that because usually that's not the best of the literature by consensus, but there's always going to be somebody who loved it. There's always going to be somebody who a story that they loved, the future generations are not going to be able to consume that same story and possibly experience what you experienced, and when you enjoyed that story yourself. So there's always going to be some loss of good experience of what some people consider good experiences. Let's now let's go on, and I will point out that the digital age does make things even different because now we have digital libraries and ebooks and like Google Books and stuff like that, where stuff that's out of print can end up like scanned in, and then it's on Google Books, it's on some data center, it's in some electronic collection with some university. The information age allows us to store information more densely, which can help prevent print media from getting lost. So is the necessity of those compact storage shelves in university libraries just filled with edition upon edition of journals. That each one of those journals gets opened once, while some of them won't be opened at all in an entire decade. Um, they're just sitting there just for completeness, for collector's sake, or just in case eventually some student is going to need something out of them. Okay, I have to deal with this puzzle here. So this one needs one, this one needs one, this one needs one. So these three don't say anything about which of these two is a bomb. This one needs one. But it can be either this. Actually, it's two. Okay. Oh, that solves it. Okay. Yeah, I think that solves it. This has to be the bottom. That one has to be clear. I have to solve this part. Okay. In order to figure out which of these two is a bomb. Anyway, these three are all bombs. That helps me out, probably. Let's move on to the next piece of media. This is, again, really long-winded. And that is movies. It's actually two pieces of media. I think of them as the same as far as hardware is concerned. Movies and music. Music more so. So I think movies went from the film reel to the VHS tape to the DVD to now just pure digital. Music went from the music box to the phonograph to the vinyl to the cassette tape to the compact disc, and now it's all just digital. But anyway, what's different about like books and the advent of movies and music and recorded music? Old school music, where you just kind of had to read the sheet music, like we call art music, or sometimes called classical music. That was, although you could get all persnickety about the semantics of classical music. Classical music only refers to the music of the classical era. Anyway, you could write the music down, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to hear like recordings, but you could at least replicate to some degree what it sounded like to the previous generation. So it was kind of like a book, right? It's all print media, essentially. Anyway, I'm talking about recorded music here. Is that the music could go out of production. So the record label, this is the publisher, now it's called a record label, could stop producing the vinyl. So that's a way like the next generation may not be able to experience music that you may have liked. I just get on with this, do this Minesweeper thing here first. So because of these two ones, I know that it's either like, it's like this, like where it's two rights or two lefts. I know it's not outers or inners. So I can nail that down. So two rights, that does these three, that does these two, that does this one, does this three, does this four, does this two. So that seems to work, right? There's nothing wrong with it. Two lefts, that satisfies this three, this two, all the ones in the middle here. This two, this four would be good. This three would also be good. So I don't see anything. I'm at a 50-50 shot here. So I just have to pick one and hope the 50-50 goes my way. It went my way. Okay. So that was scary. So this one's clear. So that means I can keep going with this. But I guess the main point is, and I'll have to stop recording this and do a splice in, which I will continue later. Music, you have another way of things going obsolete. And it accelerates the decay of the record, and that is inability to obtain a record player. In other words, you have console hardware, and that adds another element to the whole loss, or this whole loss of being able to lose story media. And I'll pick this up in another session, and in that session, I'll continue playing Minesweeper. I'm going to finish this game off recording, and I'll tell you if I finish it in the next recording session, which I'll splice together with this one. I finished it. Shame I wasn't recording, but that's how Murphy's Law works. You don't record it, and then you finish it. Anyway, here's the final answer. Yeah, I'm back to finish this one off. Just as a note here, that you know how the white border on the game it shows up on the left side, but not on the right side. On the right side, just cuts off. That's not a mistake I made in cropping or anything. That's literally how the game is, how I have it. So I don't. That's not my fault, is what I'm saying. I didn't do that. Anyway, so where I left off last time was on the topic of music and movies. So just to get that all taken care of and out of the way, your record playing vinyls. Um, there are two ways that being able to play vinyls can decay away. And your music you like to used to listen to on vinyls and would like your children to be able to listen to on the vinyl, whether they would really want to hear it or not, um, can be taken away by either your vinyls eventually wearing out, with no way to buy new ones because vinyls are not in production, or your turntable decaying and dying, just going the way, what we call the way of the world, just time takes its toll and eventually stops working. And because turntables become obsolete eventually, no one makes one that you can buy. Theoretically, you could make your own, but most things in the modern day are made by large teams. And making it by yourself is just crazy. So that's different from books or novels because you don't need a special player to plug your book into or put your slot your book into or put your book on in order to be able to experience the story that is held within that book. All you need is two eyeballs and a brain, so to speak. And you need to know the language in which the book is written. So with the advent of electronic music and film, we've introduced a new kind of way for media, or the stuff that we used to consume, to become inaccessible. So stuff can become out of print. It's current copies that are still extant after it becomes out of print that you could buy used, potentially if someone's willing to sell them, eventually decay. And as they decay, their price of the ones remaining goes up and up and up, making them increasingly more unobtainable. And in addition, the platform that you use to play this media also becomes obsolete and unobtainable, which means that if you can get the media, that's fine, but you can't play it. So again, always we've had things decay away. There have been many novels, many stories written over the millennia by man, but not all of them survive to this day. So there's a lot of words that have been written that we don't have any record of in 2022. But with music and film, we have another way in which we can lose things beyond losing writing. Beyond the ways in which we can lose writing. Now, it seems to me that we've done pretty well at preserving music. Some examples, though, of some lost music, and these are not really very fair examples because this example was I'm going to use specifically was independently published music, so it wasn't published using a record label. As much as I hate record labels, using a record label might help keep your stuff in print longer. The Fold, who made promotional music for Ninjago, they of course make their own music. That's how they got noticed, to build a portfolio so that Lego could hire them to make music for Ninjago. And they used to make Christian rock, if you weren't aware, now you are. So they made, so I don't know what their first album actually was. I think it might have been something like Feeling Like Failure Now, or maybe it's self-titled The Fold. I don't exactly remember. But I think their second album, they just kind of independently, they printed copies and sold this, and they called it Not of This World. Okay? Good luck. Although this was once manufactured, it was written onto CDs and had an album cover and was sold as compact discs that you could buy somewhere. Good luck getting a hold of one of these today. So if you're a big fan of The Fold and want a copy of every song in their discography, because you're just that completest kind of collector, Not of This World, I don't know how you could possibly get it. So it's music that is made, been sold, as is compact disc form that you can no longer get. Um, so it's like something that's been so. And then they made an EP called Rarities, which you can also not get. Now, some of the songs from Rarities and None of This World made it onto um, some of their records that they made with Jam, not Jam. Jam is some of the non-joggle stuff. Tooth and Nail, which were This Too Shall Pass and Secrets Keep You Sick. So some of the songs from their earlier works that they published independently, they made it onto some of their later records that you can get, but not all of them have. You're not going to find these on YouTube anymore either. There used to be a YouTuber who uploaded them, whose screen, oh, excuse me, I burped. His screen name was Hey There Danielle, but this person no longer has them, and it's probably because copyright or something. So anyway, that's how I know about these songs, or at least some of these songs. I never heard all of the songs on Rarities because some of them I can't find anywhere. Okay, but so you can still we do. It seems like we generally do a pretty good job um, with preserving music. 99.9% of the music I want to listen to that's obscure. You can search on YouTube and you can find some various artist topic video with that song. It's very uncommon for me to encounter some piece of music I once heard that just doesn't exist and is completely inaccessible. But um, we don't do a perfect job, as I know that sometimes music can get lost. And the example I got wasn't really necessarily that fair because it was independently published. It's just like, which is really not very conducive to preservation. Movies also we seem to preserve surprisingly well. Um, I don't really know. I do know of some kinds of movies that might have been lost, but I'm not going to get into that in too much detail. Another thing to point out, though, it's important about movies and music, is that when there's a platform change, like vinyl to cassette tape to compact disc to digital, there is a time period in which it is relatively easy to port over the material from one platform to the next. So I don't know about vinyls to cassette tape. I haven't done that, but I know my parents have once had a machine that could, in theory, copy from cassette tape to compact disc. So you could preserve your old cassette tape music in digital format by just copying it over to compact discs. So if you manage to get there in time into that specific time window of that transition period between the platforms, you could then copy things over. And as long as optical drives exist, which they're usually not installed like by default in laptops and desktops nowadays, but you can still get an external USB optical drive, and you're probably going to still be able to do that for a while. You can still change things from CD to digital. So we're in a very long window in which compact discs can still be ported over to digital, and you can still preserve your whatever you wanted to preserve on compact discs. And those aren't like doomed to be lost because of a platform change and platform decay. If your optical drive dies, we still are in a window in which you can buy a new optical drive. I don't have an old cassette tape to CD copier anymore, or cassette tape player. However, I do have, of course, an external optical drive, so that helps. um, yeah, those things eventually stop working and die. There's nothing really you can do. Um, well, you can try to repair them. It's not like there's nothing you can do, but it's difficult, especially as one individual. You definitely need a team of people. All kinds of media preservation efforts require a team of people to some degree. It's just too much of an undertaking for one person to go about. So that leads me finally to my point, which is video games. So, as someone who wasn't very familiar with video games until the last year or so, but knew about music and everything else like books and music and movies, I got to experience some of the struggles you don't like the amplification of those struggles with books and movies, the struggle of preservation. So, like music and movies, video games require a platform. You have software, which you can get, which can be just pure digital. It can come in a cartridge. It can come on a disc. It can come in various ways. And you also need a platform. You need something that can run it. And video games can go obsolete in two ways. And usually it goes obsolete in both these ways at the same time. That is, the platform, which you sometimes call a console, can go obsolete, making it so that your games can no longer be played anymore. And games can go out of print and no longer be sold. And oftentimes this can be sad because video games that you once enjoyed very well when you were playing them, you can't share these. It can be difficult to share these with your children or your friends because your old copy decayed, you can't buy a new one because it's out of print, and the platform you used to play it on might have decayed as well, making the extant used copies also useless, and so on. So, and there's things that make matters worse with video games, and it has to do with porting over. It has to do with porting over of things. So, I'm going to be a little bit slow about playing Minesweeper here because in the background I'm going to be Googling. Not that you cared about the Minesweeper anyway. The PlayStation forward compatibility. So I know that with Xbox, there are some games that were released for the original Xbox that they're playable on, say, an Xbox of 2022, like the Xbox X. But not all of them. In fact, there are some games from the Xbox One that cannot be played on the Xbox X, and some games for Xbox 360 that cannot be played on Xbox One. First Google result here is that nearly every game for the PS4 will run on PS5. So the PS5 is pretty good with backward compatibility, it appears, just by like a quick Google search. It might actually be better than the Xboxes in that regard. So Sony might be one of the better companies when it comes to this. But you start with music and video, where you have the thing, and then you also have the platform. Now, what motivated me to bring up this topic so much? Well, it has to do with a very specific Nintendo, and a very specific platform for Nintendo, which just became out of production. Just went out of production, and that is the DS. So, there's a game. The game is called 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. If you've heard me talk, if you've watched my Let's Plays of, Ever 17 isn't out yet, but Never 7, for example, you have heard me talk about this game, just because it is a famous game that is written by the same author as Never 7 and Never 17, and trying to convince people at the beginning of my videos that this game should be good because it's written by the same guy who wrote 999, right? I tried to kind of use 999's creativity as a justification for why maybe you might think this game is good, right? So I bring it up a lot. It was specifically the plot of this game, although this is somewhat of a spoiler, I have to do this in order to explain my reasoning, was created, according to Kutaro Uchikoshi, the scenario writer himself. He did it the way he did it because he was trying to take advantage of what he could do with the platform that it was to be run on, which was the Nintendo DS. See, so why does that create issues? Well, it creates issues because it makes it difficult to port the game to another platform while preserving what the like I'm trying to explain this. While preserving it in its entirety because it was made for the DS. And if you put it on a different platform besides the DS, it's really going to hurt the game. Now, this actually has been done. It has been ported to PC, but you lose a lot when you port it to PC. Right? So it's still playable. You can port it on PC. I haven't looked up the prices on old cartridges or whether or not it's on the digital store. I'll talk about the digital store a little bit later. So I don't know if you can actually how obtainable it is for the DS right now. It's definitely very obtainable on PC though. Anyway, so when the platform, it has this problem where it's almost like it doesn't even work. It's like almost like you put it on vinyl and then that music doesn't even work well. Something about being in a vinyl is important to the character of that music, and you lose something if you put it on a cassette tape, almost. Because they had that specific platform. So that's another complication you can get in with video games, where the platform specificity is really important. And the platforms could die. Nintendo just very recently stopped producing the DS. So, wow, that's going to decay. The DSs are going to decay away. And the cartridges for DS are going to decay away. And about a year from now, I'm going to look up the exact date. Nintendo DS Web Store closing date. I know it hasn't closed yet, but there's a date set out by Nintendo. March 2023. So yeah, about a year from now. They're going to stop selling digital things for the DS. What I mean by that is I think at the DS, you can divide physical things in cartridges and then plug them in. You can also buy digital games and download them onto the DS because the DS has Wi-Fi, and then it will save the game onto a micro SD card that you can insert into the DS. So you can do digital with DS as well. Once Nintendo closes the DS, like the DS web store, about a year from now, every game on that store will become inaccessible anymore. Inaccessible, especially because of how anal Nintendo is about their copyright and intellectual property. They're basically going to take all that stuff, bury it in a vault, and make it accessible to no one ever. And just kill all those games, massacre, genocide. It's like burning a library. It's not something you really had to deal with so much with music and books and stuff, didn't you? Yeah, like I said, the porting over could sometimes be more problematic on video games than it is on music. So I noticed that there's like always a window of time where you can port your music over as long as you get it in time. Well, with new platforms, you cannot play DS games on a Switch easily. So the Switch is kind of the replacement for the DS. You kind of can, and it requires some legally questionable stuff, and we'll get into that later. But not easily, and Nintendo did not intend for you to be able to do that. So with their platform switchover, they intended to kill all their games from the previous platform, as if they expect people to only be interested in playing the most current of games, and they're not to be classics. Even though there are classic books and classic movies that people still watch, even though they are not the newest ones. Like, the next generation, the generation after me, will watch the original Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and stuff, even though that didn't come out in their era, just because those are so classic. People who are born after the Titanic was made, they're still going to watch the Titanic because it was so classic, as like also movies like Pulp Fiction and so on. Not that I have actually not seen the Titanic and Pulp Fiction, but I know that people will watch those movies after the generation that during which those movies came out died. With video games, apparently Nintendo doesn't like care about that whole idea. And with video games, though, the fan base of them can identify games as classics. I often hear 999 being said as the greatest visual novel of all time, and part of what made it the greatest visual novel of all time is intrinsic to the DS platform. But there doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem like it's going to be preserved nearly as well as classic music was, or classic books were, or classic movies are. And I'm not the only one who rants about this and is disappointed about this. This is a well-known grievance of video game fans. But yet, nothing gets done to redress said grievance. So it's like kind of a silent majority sort of thing, right? It's like surprisingly unpopular how little care is taken by video game producers to make their games preservable and to preserve them, but yet that just persists, right? So that's kind of the rant part of that. But also with another issue, this is the case with other platforms as well, like Xbox, for example. Not every Xbox game that ran on the Xbox 360 can be run on the current in production Xbox. I have an example of that on disk sitting in my house right now. It needs an Xbox 360 to run, and it's not forwards compatible. Now I'm going to use an emulator to do it, because I can't get an Xbox, instead of buying an Xbox 360 just to play one game. But I probably can actually get one, just buy an old used one, but I just play one game on it? Gee whiz, right? So we have problems with the Xbox media too. Another issue with that game is, according to the people I bought it from, it actually only works on a Japanese Xbox 360. If you try to plug it into a United States Xbox 360, it won't work. Luckily, the emulator that I'm going to use claims it can work on Japanese games, and claims it can work on that game specifically, so I hope it actually can. But region locked, I mean, I don't have any issue reading a Japanese book or playing a Japanese movie, or while listening to Japanese music. But apparently, it's hard to play Japanese games because the consoles are region locked. That sucks. Another issue. So it just seems to me that video games can die and become inaccessible way easier than some previous entertainment media. And the people that make them put less effort into preserving them and keeping them available from one generation to the next. And that just sucks. And that's all really I have to say about that, I guess. So, this is kind of a side tangent that's kind of related. It has to do with me. So, I tend to not see a point in playing video games so much as I can't really share the footage on the internet of me doing so. It's just not nearly as fun. A lot of my enjoyment comes from playing video games, comes from talking to a phantom nobody. You're not nobody, but it's like you wouldn't expect anybody to actually watch these, right? While playing it, and just to make me feel like I'm actually talking to somebody, actually upload that footage to YouTube. So if there is no way for me to record the footage of my gameplay, there isn't really very much motivation for me to play the game. So all of the money I give to video game publishers for video games, I give them on the contingent that I can post the footage of me playing it on the internet. If I can't, most of that value in that video game is lost. So what does that mean? You might have thought I was going to go into a copyright rant, but the copyright thing doesn't prevent you. It just makes you don't get the monetary stuff. It can still post stuff that's copyrighted. It's just they're going to claim it. Unless they do a strike, which they usually don't, because they want the money. Man, I'm really stuck here on this Minesweeper. Although I haven't been paying close attention. Is it? I think I can. No, I'm not, because this is a two that needs two. This only can take one, so I know that these both can't be bombs. So this one has to be a bomb. Okay, doesn't really get me. Doesn't get me anywhere though. So I like, oh, two, what? Oh, that makes this one have to be clear. Oh, okay. And then there's only five empty ones that are touching it. That clears that up. Um, so I wasn't stuck. I was just stalled. So what have I tried to relate this to? I've tried to relate this to the specific, unique platform that is the DS. Consoles output via HDMI or display, I think it's HDMI mostly, to TVs, such that you can output the graphics from the console onto a TV screen display or a monitor. The Switch has a screen on it, but you can also plug a Switch also has a display out. I think it's an HDMI out, so you can play games on your Switch on a big screen. And if you can do that, then you can use a device like an EVGA XR1 Lite, XR1, or XR1 Pro to record the footage. So it's relatively, and those are really good products that EVGA makes. So, and they work very well according to reviews. The DS, on the other hand, and the Game Boy as well, does not have a display out. Which means that loses a lot of the value to me of playing games on the DS because I can't record my gameplay footage. And there are people that want to do this for other reasons as well. Like they want it up on a big screen so they can kind of have a party with them playing. They can play with their boyfriend and they can both look at the screen at the same time. Or they just don't like to look at that little small screen on the DS. There is a DS XL, but it's still not as big as a big monitor or TV screen, right? So they may not necessarily want to record the footage, but they still want to be able to put it on a big screen. This seems like a feature that people really, really wanted in the DS, but for some reason Nintendo didn't put it in there, despite the high demand. So, okay. So there you go. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? Well, with Bionicle Heroes DS, which I will play in the coming ensuing months, you can just use an emulator. Because LEGO released the intellectual property for Bionicle Heroes DS. So you're not doing anything illegal by using a DS emulator, downloading the ROM and just from the Biomedia project and just emulating it. Right? Fine. But I had this idea. I thought it would be cool if I could play it on a real DS. Just for fun. Just cause, I'm having some fun with this. Just do a little project, play it on the real DS. And I soon discovered that this is actually kind of hard to do. Because it's kind of hard to record footage from a DS. I haven't researched this to the full extent yet, but it seems pretty difficult to record DS footage. Well, you might argue, how is it done? How did Nico B do it? How does Lucagen do it? How do these YouTubers do it? And the answer is they have a DS capture mod, but anyway, I'll try to go into emulation again. I'll go back to emulation. So why can't we just emulate our DS games in order to record them? The answer is, usually, in order to get the digital file for the game in a state where you could emulate it, you have done something that violated some sort of terms of use by Nintendo. So you've done some sort of unauthorized reproduction and distribution, or just gotten around some anti-piracy measure. Because they don't want you to do that because then you can replicate it, right? So when you emulate a DS game with a DS emulator, you're most likely either enabling or doing something illegal. So you could get sued or prosecuted or something. Man, I'm stuck here. And it's not really something I want to do where you get something illegally obtained and then post a video of you using it on YouTube. That's kind of, it's a bit nerve-wracking. Okay, well, I was stuck anyway. Um, so when it comes to doing Let's Plays of DS games, it's really not something you like something like me would want to do to be doing a lot of emulation. It's okay with Bionicle Heroes GBA because that's not you're not violating a copyright at this point. Lego gave permission to the BMP to host the file, so they gave permission. But with something like 999, you might get into some trouble because you're probably pirating it if you are emulating it. There is a Twitch streamer who I like to watch his VODs sometimes when he actually posted VODs, and I have to warn you, this guy is raunchy. So I don't know if you don't like that kind of thing. Well, if you're worried about your kids watching this stuff, I don't know what to say. But um, his name was Andrew Wagenheim. But he would get like comments in his Twitch chat that were nice emulator. And he would be playing Ace Attorney usually using his DS. And he would say, "This is not an emulation. This is a legitimate 3DS." However, he had face cam and he would never lift up his 3DS into the field of view to prove that he was holding a legit 3DS. Which has the implication that he was doing a kind of a bit and he was actually emulating it. Um, yeah, he's very raunchy and very not safe for work, but he was entertaining. Anyway, um, as I confess, I watched some dirty stuff there. Um, anyway, that's the issue with emulation, and that's why you would really want to not emulate. Okay, so going back to what a DS capture mod is, there is apparently a way, despite there are ways to project um, the DS screen onto a bigger screen like a monitor or TV. One of them involves using the Wi-Fi interface that the DS already has and does not require a hardware mod. But as I hear, it's kind of a tricky software mod, and the video quality is terrible if you do it this way. But it can be done that way. A better way is to use a DS capture mod. Now, as far as I was aware up until very recently, there's only 2 DS capture mods commercially manufactured. You can make your own, and I think Chugga Conroy did. But I started watching a video about it. It turns out not to be like a tutorial or like a vlog about it. It was like a podcast segment, and I was like, "Oh dear, I don't care." But you can make your own hardware mod for it to do capture. That's something that I really have the know-how to do, even though I'm an electrical engineer. I'm not that kind of electrical engineer. Um, and there were 2 commercially available. One was from Japan, and the other was called the Loopy mod. Now, the one that came out of Japan, I forgot what the name of it is, that went out of business, and you can no longer get that. The Loopy mod, Loopy's website doesn't say that it's discontinued right now. In contrast to a different product Loopy makes, they do say is discontinued. That's why that makes that significant. However, it's perpetually out of stock, quote unquote. And so nobody knows. I don't know if anybody has Loopy's contact information or the person behind Loopy, whether or not it'll ever become in stock ever again. And as far as we can tell, me and other DS capture fans, it will never be available again, and it's pretty much a dead thing. The website is sort of still lingering out there, giving people vain hope. You can buy used DSs with the Loopy mod installed back when that was a thing you could get, and they go for about $1,200 on eBay. I managed to buy a used 3DS off of Amazon, and it cost me about $140, including tax. Um, It was in pretty good shape. I haven't tried running it because I don't have any game cartridges to put in it. I don't know if I haven't. I've just looked at it. I haven't actually tried to press the on button. But anyway, um, if it doesn't work, I'll be in some deep doo doo. So just to give you a kind of perspective of the pricing, there's a third DS capture mod, and it's the optimized one. And that one, as far as I can tell, after visiting that website, it's still around and still exists, and you can still buy it. It is a DIY mod. You do not send in your DS to optimize and have them mod it for you. You buy the mod, and you install it yourself. The company is Japanese, and I looked at the way you pay for this thing off that website. It is pretty weird and sketch, but I'm willing to take risks like that. Um, And I did watch a video about how you install it, and it looks pretty straightforward, actually. It doesn't look like a very hard install. You have to solder, but the pads are surprisingly large. You have to do like tiny little motherboard soldering, and you have to do some cutting, but it doesn't look like it's too difficult to do. So the optimized mod at this point in time seems like the only mod you can get, and it's hardly the only option. You just have to go optimized right now if you want a DS capture mod. And you would think Nintendo would make something like this due to the... Because you can tell by reading comments about this that this is a really high demand thing. People really want DS capture mods. They want to be able to project on their DS gameplay onto bigger screens and record their DS gameplay. But, phooey. But because... But they're just hard to get despite the high demand, as evidenced by the high price tag of used DSs with the DS capture mod already installed. And I don't think Nintendo, despite Nintendo's just jerkness, did that intentionally. After all, there is a display out on their next console, which is the Switch, or their current one, that is. But they never in-house made a capturable DS. And so I feel like making a capturable DS, just as like a little project, a little hobby thing, is kind of my weird little way of kind of like, take that, Nintendo, even though Nintendo didn't do that to me personally, as far as I'm aware. Nintendo just gets a really bad rap about Let's Players just because they have a legal basis for doing this, but it's just kind of a jerk thing to do despite the legal basis, because legality doesn't equate to morality. If you post, they would if you were to post gameplay footage of one of their games, they would give you a copyright strike, unless you were a Nintendo partner. And then if you were a Nintendo partner, they would take part of the revenue from that video. You know, on the like basis that you used in order to make that video, and it was very important, integral to that video that you made, Nintendo's intellectual property. And so they had an entitlement to the revenue that that video made, because they are part of what made that video successful. And that's kind of how the law works as well. But then again, that's kind of jerky to do, right? There's a lot of other game publishers that do not do that because they understand that it makes them look bad. It makes them look bad despite it being legal. In other words, it's legal but mean. Okay, so now apparently, I think right now in 2022, Nintendo doesn't do that specifically anymore, but they do some mean things. They have doing copyright takedowns of some games where the soundtrack of the game they want to later release as its own separate product or something. So it's not the end of Nintendo's meanness, but at least they aren't doing that anymore, as far as I'm aware. That being said, just to play it safe, I don't think I'm ever going to be Let's Playing any like Nintendo originated games. Unfortunately, I don't think Mario is really in the cards anymore, just because of Nintendo's reputation for those kind of things. Anyway, so I'm going to try to get through that sketchy payment method and actually buy that optimize um, capture mod for the DS and install it and see how well that works. It looks like it's something I can do. I'll have to buy a soldering iron because I don't have one in house. I know how to solder. I can solder really well. It's just that I've always done it like in an academic setting or in like a work setting. I haven't done it at home. So, the first time doing it at home. I'll get myself a mod mat and a soldering iron and get at it. And then I'll have fun just with the concept of playing Bionicle Heroes DS on a real DS, hopefully. Just, I could emulate it. There's nothing wrong with that because perfectly fine thing to do. It'll just be more fun. Just be like a little project of mine to play it on a real DS. As far as 999 is concerned, I haven't looked at the prices of old 999 cartridges or whether 999 is still on the Nintendo Web Store. But I will say that I know everything that happens in the game. So as a result, if I were to do a Let's Play, it would not be blind or not even close to it. And it would be best if I had somebody to tag team me that didn't know the game. That could, like, they could be behind the wheel and I would just be a peanut gallery. Sort of like what John Wolfe did with, Danganronpa on his YouTube channel, John Twolf. Sort of something like that, right? So it's not necessarily completely out of the question because it's very much on genre for my YouTube channel. It's just that I can't really do it right away because I don't have anybody who could tag team on that. I might want to get a hold of one of the copies of 999 just in case before it decays away so I can do that. If you want to play 999, you can get the PC port is not terrible. Just after you're done, research what was lost by porting from DS to PC. So the game is somewhat preserved in that sense. There is a PC port. And that kind of brings me to my last topic, which is console versus PC. Now, a lot of the console versus PC debate is kind of like the Chevy versus Ford truck debate versus Dodge, right? Or like in the United States, Democrats versus Republicans. Where people tend to take their allegiance from their parents and don't really think for themselves. The American pickup truck market is extremely brand locked, and people do not have open minds about it. People that think that playing on a console is a better experience than playing on a PC, they will like ad hominem attack you for saying that PC is better, or calling you a PC fanboy or something, and vice versa. Yeah, it's a very heated sector for some reason. I don't really want to get too, well, I'll get a little bit into that. I'm not really very qualified to talk about this topic that much because I haven't played on console. I've only played video games on PC, to which I have played Control and Bionicle the game and, stuff like that. But something that you might want to keep in mind is that some consoles bring up greater preservation issues. So although most of the PC versus console debate center around performance and like the ease of the setup and stuff. Another thing that you should really consider when we debate console versus PC is preservation. This topic should come into play here in this debate. Because we need to decide, is it easier, do games are preserved better when they're ported to console or ported to PC? And it seems to me it kind of depends on the console. From my quick Google earlier in this recording session, it seemed like the PlayStation is very good when it comes to forward compatibility. Games that worked on the PS2, very good chance of also working on the PS5. And so platform decay isn't such a big deal with PlayStation. Xbox is a little bit worse. Stuff like Nintendo DS, it's terrible. Especially because the DS had 2 screens on it and stuff sometimes utilized that to a high extent. So it's not necessarily cut and dry of like console gives you less preservation than PC, because it depends on the console. But a lot of games that could be played, but I can play games from 1999 for PC on my PC that I built in 2020. I think it was, yeah, and I finished it in 20. I did add-ons to it in 2021. The only thing I did in 2022 to it was just add a drive. So my 2020 2021 PC can play stuff that's pretty darn old. Can play games that came out in 1999. So preservation when it comes to PC is actually a pretty good thing. It actually works pretty well. So PC seems to beat consoles in that respect. I think the main advantage of console playing is just that building a PC for video games, first of all, you can get by a pre-built, but they're all terrible. Requires some sort of like know-how of good hardware balancing. Like you can upgrade your graphics card, and and then that what it does, that bottlenecks you on your CPU, and then you're going on. There's like so many posts on forums and such about like people upgrading their GPU and it's not giving them the frame rate they're expecting. We have to tell them, look, your CPU is so old that in order to drive this GPU, you need a more powerful CPU, and you don't understand this, and it's just a whole bunch of like confusion to people about playing games on PC. It takes a little bit more technical know-how to do PC gaming. And it's fun for people like me who like hobbies like that and like engineering to do things like play on my PC. But if you just like video games, you just want to get those video games up and going and playing, I think console might be a better option for you. And console can also be cheaper in the sense that the graphics card that I have in my computer cost even MSRP twice as much as the latest console. And that's not in addition to all the rest of the computer. Making a computer with high-end enough hardware to do the stuff to do video games on top of that extra price, on top of how much it would take just to do browsing the web, could be much more money than just simply going out and buying a console. Yeah, so PC gaming is a very hobbyist kind of thing. It's a very expensive thing. And so that makes it sort of a thing that's just not for everybody. If you just want video games, then console probably would be a better choice. It's just more plug and play and more convenient. For people like me who likes kind of challenges, and I like and embrace complications of my life, for me, PC is kind of the way to go. It just depends on it just like depends on your personality and stuff. It's not necessarily like one is so much better than the other through and through. What I really hate though is console exclusives. It's just like such a money grab. You have to have an Xbox and a PC, and you have to have an Xbox and a PlayStation because you can only play Halo on Xbox and you can only play Persona on a PlayStation. So you need all the platforms. Okay, cool. I guess I'm done talking. I think I've gotten all of this stuff out that I wanted to get out. So I am going to just finish this Minesweeper here, and that will be it. I'm going to mute myself here just so that you don't have to worry about background noise and stuff. And the rest of the video will be just seeing if I can finish this particular Minesweeper puzzle. If you watched all this, thank you. This is a particular video that I actually do want people to watch. It is showing sort of a direction my YouTube channel seems to be taking. I seem to be starting to really get into the concepts of trying to break down preservation and time barriers, language barriers, platform barriers, and so on, and attempting to play video games that are just in general hard to play, not from the difficulty of the video game itself, but from the difficulty of getting the game to run. I really want to like dive more into that. Um, and I want to get like the like understanding of the flavor out there. And man, I'm hungry. So thank you very. If you watched this far into it, thank you so. Oh, nice. We got a fail. I got one. Thank you so much for watching it. I really appreciate that. If you have any thoughts, comment the thoughts. I really want to hear people's feedback. And yeah, that's what's most important. Is just thank you for watching it and thank you for commenting on it. Only subscribe if you want the spam of my stuff in your feed, and only like it if you want it in the like video playlist and are not worried about it cluttering that up. It's like YouTubers are always like, just subscribe. It just only takes a couple seconds. Just do it. It helps so much. It's like, yeah, that also causes inflation of subscribers. It also does is not without consequence. Anyway, I probably will not mention Minesweeper in the title of this video at all. My screen name is degenerated and signing out.